Okay, I am Roxana Renee Fakira Brothers, and I was born on August 31st, 1934 in Plains, Montana, in my home where I lived then until I was out of high school.
Awesome. How old are you now?
I was just 87.
You just turned 87?
Right.
Amazing. And where do you live now?
I live at 786 4th Avenue West North in Kalispell, Montana. And I have lived here for 56 years.
What was your family dynamic like in your youth?
Oh, well, I had 13 brothers and sisters when I was born, and I'm the last of 14. And they were all living, and most of them were still living in the same town that I was born in until down the road they started moving out of town.
Where did they move, mostly?
Well, two of my brothers moved to Alaska at that time. They were young and adventurous. And then one of my brothers moved to Spokane. The others pretty much stayed within the area and found work there. There was a lot of logging camps which aren't in existence today, the kind of logging camps they had then. And so they worked at those. And we had a large house, but it was, when I was older, out of the crib, there were three of us girls that had to sleep in the same bed, and we didn't have a king-size bed. And so it was maybe a little crowded, but we made it do. And then the boys that were still around there had a room, and my grandmother, who had moved in with my folks before I was ever born, had a room of her own. And then she was pretty much taken care of by my mother until she was 101. And it was quite an adventure. I really enjoyed having her there, and it was my job every night my mother'd say to go tell Grandma it's time to eat, and that she could come to the table so that we could have dinner. And the table I have in my dining room is the one that we all ate at when I was growing up. And it has, you wouldn't believe, the number of leaves that can be put in it to make it large. And we ate every meal at that table, and unless it was a school, we took our lunch, but at breakfast and dinner, we ate at that table.
Did you have a sibling that you got along with the most, and a sibling that you got along with the least, or that you fought with a lot?
Well, no, that was really strange. There really wasn't any fighting unless the older ones had their difficulties. I don't know. No one ever seemed to think that there was any reason to, have any difficulties. And I think I was probably the luckiest that I was 4 years younger than Joe, and so everybody kind of treated me like I was special.
The baby.
Yeah.
It's obvious.
I'd go down before I started school, I'd go every morning down to the garage, to my dad's garage, and he'd always give me something to do, or I had a dog that I would take with me, and some of the guys that were sitting around in there talking, and one of them would flip a dime on the floor or nickel or something and say, "No, can your dog pick that up?" And I said, "Oh yeah, he can." So pal would run over there and pick it up and bring it to me, and then I'd go to hand it back to him. They said, "Oh no, you can keep it now." That was pretty good in the 30s to have money for candy.
Can I ask a question? What was that old cat on the back porch all the time? Was there Did you have an old cat?
Oh, we had lots of cats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And did you have a compost on your back porch area?
No, the back porch was my mother's washroom. And believe it or not, it didn't have any windows on it. It was just a screened-in porch. And she'd go out there summer, winter, anytime. On Monday morning, she'd take water that she boiled on the wood cook stove because that's the only kind of cook stove we had. We didn't have natural gas or anything. And so she'd have this big, I have it out in the garage, this big kettle-like thing. It was sit on top of the stove, and then that would heat the water. And by the time everybody was through with breakfast and she was through with the dishes and everything, then she would have that water would be boiling hot, and so she'd carry it in a bucket out on the porch and put it into the wash machine. And so then she'd have 2 rinse tubs, and she had a wringer washer and 2 rinse tubs, and she'd fill those rinse tubs with water, and it didn't have to be boiling hot. So then I think she could fill them with water from the outdoors through a hose that she brought up on the porch. And so she'd spend that day out there washing clothes, putting them through the wringer and the rinse tub, another wringer, and out of the rinse tubs and into a basket to carry them outside on the clothesline. And it didn't matter if it was raining or what or freezing, she had to hang those clothes up.
Wow.
And when I was old enough to help, I'd come home from school and she'd saved all the handkerchiefs. And by the way, everybody had handkerchiefs. They didn't have Kleenex. And handkerchiefs and washcloths and socks for me to hang up. And I'm sure it went through all the kids as they were growing up. But you had to get those on the line right away when you got home from school. And then when they were frozen, and at maybe 6 o'clock at night or something, she'd have to bring everything in, and you had to drape it around if it was frozen, because what else would you do with it?
So they'd be all over the house.
Yeah. So
Wow.
hard. Life was hard then, and
So
I
you
don't
burnt
think
wood.
people realize
You burnt wood.
how much we put in, or how much they put into it. I didn't have to work as hard as she did, ever.
And she was just a little thing, wasn't she?
Well, she was she was taller than I was. She was probably 5'8", 5'7".
And you said that there was a 10-year age difference between your parents. How old was she when your parents got together?
You know, I'm not sure. I've never really, that family tree thing might explain it a little better, but I think she was probably, I doubt she was even 20.
Wow.
Probably could have been 16, 18, somewhere in that
Wow.
time frame. And yeah, like I say, my dad was doing field work for a farmer, and when he met her, and then I think he was doing some for her dad or her mother. Well, her mother had 9 children, and her husband died from gangrene when the youngest was a baby. So she was pretty much alone raising her children. And so then when she got old, when my grandma got old, my mother thought that someone needed to take care of her, because she homesteaded when she was 70 out by Havre, just north of Havre. I went out there one time, and a friend of mine that lived out there when she was growing up, we drove out there, and I went to the courthouse and got all the records of where her homestead was. and we drove out there, and as we were out of the car looking around to try to figure out exactly with the map and everything what one was hers, and her and two of her daughters and one of her sons each homesteaded, and they had them on four corners of the homestead place there. And so this guy came driving up in this truck, and he stopped and got out, and he said, "Can I help you with anything?" And so I showed him what I was looking for and everything, and he says, "Oh, that's right here, and I own it now." And so that was kind of a neat thing to know. Anyway, so Grandma's in 1918. You want me to go on like this?
It's fine.
Yeah.
Her son that homesteaded with her died of the Spanish flu. And so she and the two daughters sold their homesteads and left. And she went up to Canada and to take care of the children for one of her sons that his wife died of the Spanish flu. And the two girls went out to Oregon and lived there until they died. So some in Oregon and some in Washington after that whole time frame. But Grandma was in Canada for many years helping this uncle up there, and then she came down, and Mother insisted that she stay with us because she felt like she was working too hard for her as she was getting so old.
No, didn't your mother end up living with you here?
Yeah, she did, until Gertie decided that she should be in the nursing home in Plains. So that was about 70, maybe 74, that she took her to Plains, to the nursing home.
But she lived with you how long?
I think it was 4 years. And that was such a nice time. She made those pillows like that, and she made a bunch of them and gave them to the kids to give to their friends.
Those are nice.
They are nice. They're really cute. My dad was probably pretty instrumental in some of my thinking and doing, and he was quite political. He was the only one in town that put Democrat signs in the windows of his garage. And he didn't care if they liked it or not. He wasn't pushy about it, but he wanted people to know. And Mike Mansfield, who was one of the best senators Montana ever had, came one time to Plains, and Dad invited him over to dinner, and so he came to the house and had dinner with us. And that was pretty impressive. Well, he'd go out hunting and he loved to hunt chink. And so he had a chink dog, and the dog, this was so funny because he'd take me hunting with him also. And this one time, the farmer over around Charlotte would clean out his field of cattle, and then he'd invite Dad over to hunt chink in the fields where the cows had been grazing. And so we were walking through the field, and the dog stopped and pointed, and he said, "Okay, flush it out." And the dog went in to get it out, and a calf came up. And so he's chasing this calf across the field, and Dad's hollering, "Stop!" And I took off running because I was afraid he might shoot the dog.
That would scare you worse than a chick.
Got him to come back with us. So anyway, it was times like that were so much fun, and I loved to go with Dad when he'd go on in the truck somewhere. And we went to Missoula one time for something, and as we were coming back, there was a truck had rolled over, and there were watermelon all over everywhere. And the guy that was out there said, "Oh, take all you want, take all you want." So we got I don't know, 3, 4, 5 watermelon to take home with us. You know, things things like that that kind of make your day.
Mhm.
My mother was such a kind and caring person that you can't help but get a lot of influence from somebody like that. And she did so many things for people, and it just showed me that, you know, you can help other people. And even in the 30s when things were not good, there were people that would stop. They were, what were they called? Anyway, they'd come to the door and they'd say, can we do some work for you for a sandwich or for dinner or for something like that? And always, she would always take care of them and give them maybe, well, go split some wood or go do this. And it was, yeah, so caring. She was so, thought that people needed to be taken care of. And she had a rental house across the street. And I know that she never would have charged those folks hardly anything because they weren't doing that well at that time, and helped them out any way she could, and had a vegetable garden, and she'd give away things that she didn't need. And so, yeah, I think that was she left a huge impression in that way.
So she helped shape your gentleness, your kindness.
Well, I hope I am.
You said that was the 30s. Were you or the family affected by the Great Depression at all, or what was
Well,
going on?
this is something I never felt like we were. I'm sure everybody was in a way, but I was born in 34, and so it was still pretty raging pretty much as I was growing up, and things weren't that great for people. And so I can't imagine how my dad could sell a car at that time, but he must have, or to be selling the gas to the farmers or all of those things. That's the only way we lived. Okay, well, I started school when I was 6 in Plains, and then when I was in the 3rd grade, my brother and I would have to go home from school and carry wood into the back porch because you had to split your own wood and carry it in to burn to cook supper and stuff. So we'd have to keep the wood box filled for Mother. And so every night after school, we'd have to fill the wood box. And we were out splitting the wood one night, and he got my finger and cut it off. And so I went running in. I can just remember throwing my hand over the other hand, and one finger was just by a thread hanging. And she saw it, and she grabbed me and wrapped a towel around it and took me into the living room and sat down and was holding me. And then she called the garage to see if somebody would come and get us to take us to the doctor. And so my brother came and picked us up and took us over to the doctor in town, and he did some things on it, wrapped it good, and said, "Now I'm going to send you to Missoula because I can't do the rest." And so then my brother drove us on to Missoula and was in the hospital, went to Thornton's Hospital in Missoula, and that was during the Second World War. And one thing that I remember is Harry, Pat's dad, came to the hospital to see me. He was home on leave, and so he came to see me, and that was so nice. And then one of the fellows that worked in the hospital was at Fort Missoula. He was an Italian serviceman. No, he wasn't a serviceman. I think he was on a cruise ship or something out in New York, and they took them all off of those ships and put them in Fort Missoula rather than let them go back to Italy. And this one guy would come and carry me around the hospital every morning and introduced me to everybody and talked to everybody. And it was just kind of a fun thing, actually. And so I had to stay there a week because there was no antibiotics or anything, and they had to dress it every morning to make sure I didn't get an infection. And then after that week that I was there, Mother came in on the train and came to the hospital and picked me up, and we walked from Thornton's Hospital to the train depot, which is a ways. And I just remember them saying, "Oh, that hellgate wind." Got off the train and went back to school. I mean, that was just pretty plain and simple. But I did get teased a little about losing my finger, and it was actually Joe did it. It wasn't me. I didn't have the axe in my hand. So, but got through that, and like we got through the war, and everything was pretty good. I did have to repeat my third grade year because I must have missed enough to really throw me back, and that was the only really sad part of it. Well, then, let's see. Oh, I got a job at the soda fountain in the drugstore downtown, and the pharmacist there that ran the drugstore and the soda fountain and the whole thing was the one that hired me in the soda fountain, and I never got hooked on Coke. That was not my thing. And he said, "You can have all the Coke you want for nothing." And it just wasn't one of the things I liked. But I worked there for maybe 2 summers, and enough that I saved enough money to buy a camera. I wanted to take pictures, and the camera sits over there. So that was one of the better things I did with my money. So then I went to work for Gertie. She had bought this kind of like a little snack bar type restaurant. It wasn't really they didn't make dinners and things. It was a hamburger stand or whatever you want to call it. And then so I worked for her for a couple of years there, and that was about the time that Harry was having, her husband, was having some real problems. He had come back from the service and he had a brain tumor. He was a underwater CB, they called him then, and had, through the explosion of the mines that they set underwater over in the Asian Sea somewhere, he had ended up with a brain tumor, and he died not too long after that. I was probably just out of high school, or no, I was a couple years out of high school. Pat was in college when he passed away. And that was a tragic situation. And then in the summertime, I worked for the blisterous camps, the Forest Service. Dawn Knowles' mother was one of the cooks, and her sister was the other cook, and they asked me if I would like to come and be one of the flunkies, they called them. You peeled the potatoes and you washed dishes and you set the tables and you waited on the people. It was kind of like being a waitress, and it was really a fun job, and probably one of the better paying jobs that anybody had in those days. And so anyway, then the third year I was going to go do it. I was out of high school that year, and they canceled it. It was no longer going to happen. So I went to work then for Wesley at the garage. We had to pump gas and check people's oil and wash their windshields and do all the things that they don't do now. And so it was kind of a fun job because all the tourists that would come through they'd like to have their tires checked and their windshields washed and everything. And then that's where I met Bill, because he had come to town working on a pipeline that they were laying from Billings to Spokane. And they were at that time right in the plains, well, from Hot Springs to Thompson Falls. That was the area they were working on at that time. And he was staying in the rooming house that Dorothy had right next to the garage. And so then the company that they were working for was the same company that the gas that we were pumping. And so they all were told to buy their gas there. And they did. And so anyway, then he asked me out and we started dating. And then that was in March, I believe. And we went out April, and then in June, no, in April, he asked me to marry him, and in May, we got engaged and got married in June.
Sheesh,
Whirlwind.
Whirlwind. he had come up here from Texas. He was born and raised down in Texas, but he'd been in the Navy, and so he'd been around the world, so to speak. And then I found an apartment close there where $25 a month, if you can believe.
Where?
Right close in Plains there. It was about a block from my parents' house and about a block from Gertie's house. And anyway, a small area. And so we lived there. And then I believe it was in September that we had to move. And so we loaded up and we went down to Texas for a pipeline job down there. It's a different job every time that's why I don't understand why they want people to work pipelines, because you're moving all the time. It's not ever the same job or anything. And if you go by yourself, of course, then your family never sees you all that whole time. And so anyway, this was something that I really, really didn't like, is we got down to Texas and we were driving into the state, and I see this sign on the side of the road, and it upset me so much. I never wanted to even go to Texas, but it said, "Don't let the sun set on your head, black people." And I just, how can they say that? I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "They have to be out of town before dark." And I said, "Is that fair? Can you do that?" Oh. So anyway, it just bothers me to this day that they can be so. But we went down and I met his family, and they all seemed like nice folks that, and I just couldn't believe that they could go along with what was going on. And his mother never said anything about it, and I didn't question her. But his dad wasn't doing that well at that time. He had been in the First World War and had something similar to Agent Orange, mustard gas. And he died shortly after we were married. And so then we traveled for 5 years all over, and after 2 years we had Anne. She was born in 56. We were married in 54. She was born in 56 and 4th of July. And then we kept traveling. We lived in Missoula, and we lived in Texas, and we lived in Nebraska and Kansas and Canada, and out by in Nevada, out of Reno, Nevada, and can't even think of all the places right now off the top of my head, but we were moving around pretty much all the time for 5 years. And after we had David and then we had Renee, and I said, let's get a trailer house. And he said, no, I would never pull a trailer house. And I said, well, then let's not do this anymore. This is getting too much to pack up. And all you could have was just what you needed to cook with and what you needed to wear. And that was it. You were moving every 6 weeks to 2 months, and it was just not fun. I mean, you'd meet nice people and just get acquainted with them, and you were on the road again. And so, and he said, well, okay, he'd see. So he went down to the mill there in Plains and see if he could get a job. And they gave him a job raking the yard, getting all the junk out of the mill yard. And so he took it and he worked his way up to setting up the planer and doing pretty much a lot of it. And then one day some of the members got together and asked him if he would be the union leader for the lumber and sawmill workers. And he came home and we talked about it, and he said, well, it's going to be a lot of traveling, and we'll have to move to Kalispell. And I said, well, that's the only thing I don't want to do is move to Kalispell, because we had so many good friends right there that we were having barbecues every weekend and, you know, doing fun things with people that you were acquainted with, and some of them that had lived there as long as I had or were born and raised there. And but in order to get this job, which he felt was better, then we had to move. And so then we sold our house and came up here. We started looking for a place early on before we moved, and Gertie brought me up one day, and Tina was just a baby. I think she was born in May, and this was July that we were coming up here looking. And so I'd bring her with me, and we found this house was about the only house in lower Kalispell. There were some up in the Northridge area, but this one was 18,000, and those up in Northridge were 20,000. But the worst part of them was they were these, like the one over there, it's split entry. You had to go upstairs to go to the kitchen, and you had to go downstairs to go to the bedrooms. And I mean, I just didn't. Mother had always said, don't get a house with a lot of stairs. And so that pretty much made my decision that I didn't want to go up there in Northridge. And so we asked about if we could be in here by the end of August so the kids could start school. And they said, oh, sure, they'd be out. They were moving to Browning, and so they moved out, and we got in here about the 23rd of August and got all set up, and the kids started school then in September. And I was talking to the priest one day before we left, and he said, well, if there's a Catholic school there, you have to send your children to the Catholic school. And oh, really? And so there's elementary school right over here, and the Catholic school is clear down the other side of town. And so I told Bill, and he made the arrangements with the priest to get the kids into there was Anne and David and Renee. Well, Renee, yeah, she started first grade here. And So he had to get him enrolled in school before we moved up here. And so that was all taken care of. Then one of the gals that the priest gave me her name, that lived just a block away, had 2 children that she was taking to school. And he said, maybe you should talk to her. Maybe she'll pick your kids up in the morning, because Bill wasn't in town with his job. He was traveling all the time. And so she said, sure, she would love to. So that started it. And actually, I started them walking to school in the morning from here. The kids and I got together and we walked one morning to see how long it would take, and then so I'd know when to get them up and get them going and get out the door so that they could get there in time. And they didn't mind the walk, and they really enjoyed walking home because they'd stop in the drugstore in different places that I wish they hadn't. So anyway, we made that work, and they all 9 of them went through St. Matthew's. And I didn't, if I had to do over, I'd send them over here to Russell. There's nothing wrong with that school. So but that's the way it went.
Nice.
What was your husband like? Why did you fall in love with him?
Oh, he was so kind and so much fun, and I loved to dance. We go out dancing and go to dinner, and he really kind of, I might say, fell in love with my dad. He thought he was the greatest, and had been. In fact, I felt, and he had been a pretty Southern prejudiced person, and he got to talking to my dad, and they got along so well, and that was a real plus for him. And my dad was not prejudiced at all for anybody ever. In fact, he thought it was terrible the way we had done the Indians, putting them on reservations and everything. He was just very upset with how all that went. Bill, my husband, was the campaign manager, Montana campaign manager for Jesse Jackson when he ran for president. And that was quite an exciting time.
Yeah. So what has changed for women since your youth in terms of expectations of a woman?
Well, it took a long time, and the expectations were, even when I was married, that the woman's place was in the home, and you were supposed to stay home and raise your family, and very few women were supposed to go to work. It was only if they didn't have any family or anything, but there wasn't supposed to. When you're taking your children to daycare, wasn't a thing that was supposed to be happening. And I stayed home because with as many as I had, I didn't feel comfortable taking them to daycare, and I didn't have the college degree to go get the kind of job that would have paid enough to make it easy to do all that. And a lot of times I would take care of kids in the neighborhood that their mothers went to work. But it wasn't the most popular thing, and most of the jobs weren't high-tech or whatever you want to call it. You could go and clean in a motel, or you could cook in a restaurant or wait tables or something. It was really very, what I guess you might consider low-grade jobs. And so it was kind of sad the way we were treated. And then, of course, it would depend on how much help we had from the politicians, so to speak, and all, as to where all that went. But the part that I want to go back to that I thought was so funny was when they started letting you wear pants, long pants, to school. I mean, girls had to wear dresses or skirts or something, you couldn't put on a pair of pants. And I can remember the first time my mother made me a pair of pants, and Pat got so mad, and he was living with us because his dad was overseas, and he got so mad that he took them and threw them in the fireplace. And the end of my pants.
Oh my goodness.
And so, but you know, that came about so slowly. It was the idea that you were supposed to do the work, and that was it. Men, Bill even told me when we were first married that men didn't belong in the kitchen. He wouldn't make a pot of coffee or cook anything. He wouldn't even do dishes or anything. And so this was a real rude awakening that of course, my dad wasn't in the kitchen either, so I guess I should have expected that. But some of my brothers and brother-in-laws were off and on. They didn't do as much in the kitchen as their wives did, but so it's been a long time coming to get to where we're at today, and I still don't think we're finalized things because they don't always trust women to do the important things.
What has changed for women since your youth in terms of recreation and fun, like what you would go do over time?
Let's see. Well, you know that women couldn't play basketball when they could when your grandmother was in high school, but right after that they took it all away from kids. So women could not be participating in any sports in high school or college, even if they were very capable. And so that went on until about 72, I think, when they opened it up for girls to start playing basketball. And so they claimed that it was hard on the body and that it was going to ruin a woman's ability to produce children, and you know, they had all kinds of good reasons. But I just remember, oh my gosh, you know, how can we? Because I loved to play basketball. I'd play outside with Pat and Mike and the kids at home. Harry had put up a basketball net and backboards, whatever you call it anyway, in their backyard. And I loved to be out there shooting baskets and playing basketball with them. But not in school.
Was that statewide or like nationwide?
I think it was nationwide.
What about when you were in high school? What did you girls do for fun?
Oh, gosh. Well, there was one thing we did that was kind of fun, that was funny. Every fall when school would start, they'd have where you put the freshman class through all kinds of turmoil in order to, what did they call that, the initiation. And so the freshmen, or every class, would see if we could get up on the hill in the back of town where we had a P, that the freshmen would have to paint that and put all the rocks in the right place every fall after school started. And so all the classes go up and we'd put our number, our year, beside the P out of the rocks that were on the P. And so then the freshmen would have more work to do. So it was kind of a prize in a way for the last class to get their number up there. So about 6 o'clock in the morning, we'd all run up there and get it done and get back just in time to start class. Run down that hill and into the school.
And the P was for planes?
Yeah.
Is the P still there?
Yeah, it is, but it's they've made it now to where it's solid. You can't. Made a concrete one.
You can't haze anybody?
No, no.
Oh, cute. So, a little more serious question about women. So, what has changed for women since your youth in terms of rights?
Well, they keep changing, so I don't know. It's what's come out just within the last couple days is really kind of scary, because I don't think that the state government needs to tell a woman what they can and can't do, and the fact that they're paying people to sneak up on them and to find out exactly. Well, if I took somebody to a doctor to check on what was going on, if I was pregnant or whatever, if I took somebody, they could arrest me for taking them without even knowing whether they were going for an abortion or just for a well check or whatever. And those kinds of things are so sad, and I don't know why they think they have to control the women. And that's exactly what it is. It's controlling them. And I'm not in favor of abortions, but I don't think I can choose for somebody else whether they should or shouldn't have one. It's not my business. So I think that there's been a lot of progress made in the way of education. So if you can get an education to be a doctor, a specialist, or, well, even now they took a woman could go to the moon, and that would have been something I would have never thought they would do. That would be so adventurous. I think that's something that should be allowed, and more of those kinds of things for women, because most of them are just as smart as the men that are controlling them, or smarter, and more caring. Well, I have to tell you, I was after the kids were all in school and Bill had retired and was at home, I decided I was going to go get a job, and he could stay home and do the housekeeping and the cooking. And so I applied for a job I hadn't gotten my degree. I went to school for a short time, but I never got my degree. So I applied for a job as a custodian at the high school, and they gave me the job. And then the building head over here at Russell School opened up, and that's the person that goes and is there during the day to take care of things and oversee the kids and everything. And so I applied for that and got it. And I was at the same time, I was president of the union that was with the custodians and the people that did the repairs and stuff, the maintenance people. And so that was, to me, that was a real enlightenment. I really enjoyed being the president of the union. And at one time, the superintendent said, well, you know you're a pain in the ass. And I said, yes, and I intend to stay that way. So I would, when we would be going to negotiate a contract, I would contact all of the union members and invite them down to this restaurant that had a big upstairs dining area, and there weren't always a lot of people up there, so I'd invite them to come up there, and we'd have pizza and talk about what they would like to see in the next contract, and just go over the whole thing with them so that everybody had an opportunity to make some kind of a contribution. Excuse me. And so then when it was time to negotiate, the negotiating committee knew how the people felt, and they could go in with what they felt was the most important items, because we could take like 10 different items in to our negotiations. And we were able to get some really good things, and we did have paid sick leave and paid vacation, and our pay scale wasn't that bad. In fact, the people that went around cleaning houses were all putting in for subs for custodians because our pay was much better than theirs. And when I quit, which is about 20 years ago, more than 20, I was making $10 an hour plus benefits, which at that time wasn't that bad. And if we worked on a holiday for some reason, we'd get time and a half for that day. And so anyway, I worked at that until I retired, and I was, like I say, over here at the daytime. I'd have to get the dining area cleaned out because the teachers had come in with their gym classes right after lunch, and so that was probably the biggest job. And then I'd come home for lunch and go back about 3 till 5. I'd go over in the morning about 6, and so anyway, that was I really enjoyed it, and the kids were fun to be around.
You've talked about you worked in a union, and
Right.
what are the benefits of a union to you? And like, why do you approve of the unions or disapprove? But you
Well,
don't?
yes, I approve greatly of them if they don't let people, like there was an article in the paper today about somebody that belonged to the union, but they didn't know why they had to pay union dues because they weren't active with the union. Well, they get all the benefits whether they are active with the union or not, and they have to follow the union's guidelines, which aren't that much different than what the working place guidelines are. But you don't pay union dues, who's going to pay for the union executives who go around and check on all the unions all the time and make sure things are going right? Who's going to pay their wages, and who's going to pay for their traveling time? The dues have got to go to something that's positive, plus some of your dues goes to your retirement. And young people don't seem to realize how important that retirement is until it comes time, and then if they don't have it, what are they going to do? I would be in a big hole if I didn't have. Bill and I made a deal that we would take a part of his retirement, and then if he died before I did, I would get some of his retirement. And then I have a small retirement from my union and my Social Security, so I'm able to get by and be very comfortable, I would say. I'm not rich and I don't care, but if you don't have a union that's strong and they can force people to not want to pay dues and start arguing about it, it'd be like Albertsons was over here. They had a guy come in and convince all the young people that, no, let's get rid of the union, let's decertify. And so they said, oh yeah, let's decertify. And the older employees were getting very concerned because they would end up losing their retirement. And there at Albertsons, they get double time and a half for holidays that they work. And there's some other benefits that are, well, their medical and their vacations and all of those things that are so important that they wouldn't have and they don't have at the stores that aren't union. So you can choose for yourself, but when you're doing that, you got to think about what is going to happen down the road. And it's not only going to affect you, but everybody else that's in the same boat you are.
What advice would you give to the young?
Well, I guess get the best job you can get and work your way up and be honest and be persevering and show up for work every day and work your hardest. I mean, if you're giving to your employer what you should, then they certainly should be willing to reward you with what you deserve. And I just don't understand how people can continue to work for some of these huge corporations that just keep getting bigger and not think about organizing and joining a union. It's really, to me, it's mind-boggling that they can even not think that that's important.
Some of them have tried, and it's really hard. A group of Amazon workers tried in Georgia a couple months ago,
Right.
and they couldn't get it to pass. So I don't think it's that people don't see the benefit of it, but those big companies are so hard because they have a lot of money to fight off, the unions that people want.
Well, and this is another thing they're doing right here at this hospital. They had voted to belong to SEIU, the union, and you can see my signs out in the front yard. and the hospital administrator will not even sit down at the table with them to find out what they're asking for. He won't give them the time to even look it over or anything. And they complain, some people complain, well, SEIU, why don't they just join the nurses union? Well, SEIU is a union that will encompass other people that are working in the hospital too. It doesn't mean that the nurses are going to do any less or get any less. It just means that more people are going to be covered under union coverage, so they'll get benefits that they won't get otherwise. Over in Cutbank, they joined just the nurses union. The nurses just joined. Well, this leaves everybody else out in the cold. And is that fair? So my thinking is, if you're going to join and SEIU comes and they explain to you what they can do, and enough people agree that they voted in, then see what you can do to help out and be a part of it.
For people to visualize what it was before and what it's become, maybe explain what it was like when you moved here in that era, and then
it was a very, very slow moving town of, I think we had something like 15,000 people. And the kids could ride their bikes down Main Street, ride them to school, and like Trish was reminding me the other day that when Tammy and Carol would come from Missoula, that's Ramona's two girls, younger girls, and they would come and stay for a week or so. And she said, we'd go out here on this highway and see if we could ride up that hill on our bikes, and it was a gravel road.
the highway.
Yeah, so George Whitefish. And there were no buildings on that side of the highway. It was out in the field up there was a drive-in theater. And before they put all this nursing homes and the hospital and development up there. And the golf course was right across the highway, and then was this drive-in theater. And so it's changed, so much. It's just unbelievable.
What do you think about the amount of trees that are being logged off in this area? What effect it's going to have on us
It's already
in general?
It's already bothering I mean, look at the wind. We never had wind here before. It was only windy at certain times if a big storm would come through. Now, every day you look out and the wind is blowing. They have clear cut so much of the land outside of town where there were trees that it's creating more of a probably part of this overall global warming. It's probably making that happen faster. When Plum Creek received all that land. Well, it wasn't theirs to begin with. It was ACM that got all that land after the trains came in, and they were given this land to build the railroad into this part of the country, and then they were supposed to give back what they didn't put their tracks on and everything back to the government, but they didn't. They refused to, so it's all gone to these big private corporations. And Plum Creek had this around here, and before they sold it to Weyerhaeuser, they clear-cut most of the better land that could be developed into housing, and a lot of houses around lakes and things that were made happen because they clear-cut all that land and then sold it to people. And that's going to be the beginning of the end. And I can remember back in, it would have probably been the 50s, and Bill went to work for ACM at one time he was setting chokers for Glenn, who a brother-in-law in Missoula, and we were out at a lake out west of town here, and he would go out with Glenn to work in the morning, and then they would all come back, and they had a nice little restaurant there on the lake, and we'd go down and play cards, and it was just a really nice area to be in. And one of the fellows that we met there was called a timber cruiser, and he'd go around and mark the trees they were supposed to cut, and it wasn't any clear cutting at all. It was select trees that they cut, and this left trees for the future and left the land so that we didn't get all this wind, and it didn't grow up into a bunch of grass and stuff that would burn so fast. And then they quit doing that after Plum Creek took over all that forest, and it's just been a mess.
It's easy for us to pick out the things that we dislike in our changing community. Is there things that you do like about what's happened in the Flathead Valley and just things that you think are helping?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think they're starting to do more downtown to improve the situation down there, because all of this up there on the hill, all this development has really created a lot of problems. There's good and bad in it, but the traffic has gotten so horrible, and but now they're concentrating on doing some things downtown that can help the downtown merchants and help them stay alive. Because if you send all the people up there, you don't have any. And I noticed driving down through Main Street now, you find people on the street walking, and they've got some neat little restaurants down there and some nice little stores that people should go into and make use of all that. And so I think it's going to happen more all the time. I'm not a fan of Walmart, so I have a real problem with ever going there. I've never been in this store.
You're a woman in her 80s, and you've had a long life, and happy life. When you're speaking to maybe your family here, your kids, your grandkids, what advice do you have for their lives and how to live a long, happy life?
Boy, that's hard. I find that so many times they're using electronics so much that I don't think they're actually relating to one another. And this really worries me about what's going to happen down the road, because if you don't have a face-to-face conversation with people, I think it changes your whole relationship. And I know I find some situations where people get kind of nasty, and I think part of that is some of the stuff they read on that, and it isn't always nice information, and it changes their whole outlook on life. And so I don't know. I would hesitate to try to tell them anything about all that, because how do you tell them they shouldn't be on the electronics, or they shouldn't, you know? It's not my place to tell them how and what and where, and it bothers me though that's taking over their lives.
Got it.
And I try to equate that with my life and how, because things are changing all the time. And my mother used to say, I could drive a team of horses, but I can't drive a car. And she never did. She tried one time, and you had to back up a hill. You couldn't drive up a hill with the way the cars were built. And that just scared the out of her. And she never drove
forward up a hill with the cars
not
back in the day.
not then.
Ooh.
No.
Wow.
Well, look at the Model Ts and the Model As. I mean, they just didn't have the kind of power to go up the hill. Now, I didn't drive one of them, so I don't know, but that's just what she used to say, because it scared her. And so I wonder how to equate our lives with today's lives, what we had that would make things so much different.
I don't have a question. I have a compliment
Oh,
to you. It's so nice to have somebody that has good values. And I met some people through life that have good values, and I picked up on them. And it's nice that I met you, and that I found out where you're coming from and how you felt about, just here listening to you. I pretty much feel the same about everything you said. So it's nice to have somebody around that feels good about good values, that cares about the earth, that cares about people, and doesn't care about money, because you can be called lazy, or you can not care like your dad said, and just carry on with life, and to carry those values forward, and try to teach your kids that money's not everything. And I do agree, I mean, I'm not the one being interviewed, but I do agree with, I don't even have a cell phone, that it's gone so far that it's like a little TV. And it's basic, but you're getting something from people that you know, but you're also getting other information, like you say. And like Kenny said to me, I don't even know about them, but they learn what you like, so they tell you what you like, and what you should like, and because they have a profile on you. That's kind of weird.
Oh, it's scary. To me, it's very scary. I was really concerned that we might get Trump back in for president again, and I just couldn't figure out where we would go from where we are. And everything that could be good, they are giving Biden hell for. And I don't know whether he's right or wrong, but I think wars don't need to be. We don't need to be fighting over in somebody else's country. And this is what we've been doing for years. And it isn't only now, but this war has been going on way too long, and I don't think it was started for a truthful reason to begin with.
You're right.
So, yeah, I think our government has gotten kind of way off track.
Maybe that's the reason people don't like our government, but what do you do? What are you going to replace it with? We got to take this kind of slow, because if we let these people that attack the Capitol,
wow.
and if they don't have a replacement, and they just want to replace it with their man, and you know where that goes.
Yeah, yeah,
That's not fair.
not.
So,
No, but how did he get so many people suckered in?
I guess they were just always that way, and maybe they were just stupid. That's
Well,
what
it just
some
worries me that this electronics has created part of that.
It has. It has, and people are restless.
Yeah.
And excuse me, but I'm not being interviewed, but things are moving so friggin' fast that we need to slow down and listen to each other occasionally and slow the game down.
Right. Yeah, nobody, I mean, you don't find neighborhoods like they were even 10, 20 years ago. I mean, we had 30 kids out here playing in the street for the first, I don't know how many years that we lived here, but we'd have kids from the other side of the street and across the street everywhere. They'd be out here playing kick the can or Red Rover or whatever games.
Using their imaginations.
Yes, yes, and having fun. And it always, the guy that, he had a son named Sean that would come over here and play, and they had a split level house over a block away, and at night you'd hear him holler, "Sean Carter, get home and eat dinner." He'd be out here and you could hear him clear from over there.
Yeah, no kidding.
And then when Marcia was a baby and I'd be trying to sit in here and rock her to sleep, and she'd hear the kids out there playing, you think she was going to go to sleep? I'd have to go sit on the steps so she could watch them play.
Exciting. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's all I got. And I sure appreciate you.
Chuck, I love you,
being,
and you've been a special place in my heart for a long time.
well, you're just easy. You're just so easy to get along with, and it just,
Well, I like to be.
simple.
I don't try
Simple. You're very
to,
simple.
but I hate what some people are doing to our.
We'll just just keep fighting for what we believe in, and try to slow things down.
Oh gosh. Well, I think that you're going to have to take over because of
I don't know.
my mind isn't doing that.
I think I'm tired.
Yeah. You know, my next, I really am going to do one more thing. And out at Trish's school, they want to put a roundabout right there at the school. And that, to me, on a highway, wide open highway, is such a poor thing to have. People don't slow down enough. So the kids go across that highway to go home, and they were talking about putting in an underpass for the highway, and then they found they couldn't because there's too much water. It's a, what do they call it anyway, that water in the land.
Wetland.
Yeah, wetlands. And so then we were talking about, I was asking Trish about, well, why not put an overpass over there in Nirada? They have an overpass right there in town where people walk across, and they've made it into a really nice looking area. And I said, put an overpass and put the solar energy on the top of the overpass for the school's electricity.
Yeah, it's right wide open.
Yeah, oh my gosh, yes, totally. And so they talked to the highway department about it, and they said, oh, well, it would be too expensive, and it would, all these excuses. Well, what does a roundabout cost, and how long does that take? This wouldn't hold up the traffic forever. They can make those bridges.
Yeah, they didn't think of it first.
Right. Well, they didn't care. They had their idea. So anyway, this is my thing I'm going to go work on, is getting them to put an overpass with solar energy on it.
Wow.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, guys.
Well, it probably never happened.
Oh, I don't know. You got a lot of power.
Oh, no.
You do.
You got powerful people around.
Nesting. I had a question, but do you want me to get in the seat, babe?
Sure.
Okay. So Chuck said, or I think Chuck said that you at some point were going to do a memoir, or you were writing your memoir.
I'm
What was that
trying
about?
to.
Are you still working on it?
Yes.
Okay.
And this is kind of sad because at the senior center, they have a class that you can, the best story of your life or something like that, and they'll help you out with it. But after COVID came along, I'm not going to the senior center, and so I'm losing some time. And it's, like I said, it's hard to put sentences together when, when you've been sitting around alone forever.
So what's the best story of your life?
Oh my gosh. You know, it amazes people that anybody can have 14 kids and that they can all live together. And so I don't know, it's just being part of a family, I think, is the most important part of my life. And I truly miss all my sisters and brothers, and it's a lonely time. And we tried to get together frequently to have memories and everything, and it was always a fun time.
Nice.
And I don't know. I love that when my kids and I get together, but there's another big problem with the COVID is getting them all together anymore. And most of us got over to Virginia for my granddaughter's wedding, and that was a wonderful week.
Fun.
But you need more of those kinds of things.
What are you doing for hobbies now? Or what do you like to do?
Oh, really not much of anything. I'm pretty much, I try to keep doing a little exercise every day, and because they have one on public television that you can follow, and so that helps out. But you just, not having somebody to do things with makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
And so I'll try to get my booster shot and get back in the mix.
Yeah.
All right, amazing. Thanks for talking with us today.
No,
Roxy.
thank you. I love you all so much, and this has been fun.